It's 1509. The Indian Ocean is about to witness one of history's most desperate last stands. Venice, once the undisputed master of global trade, has just formed the most unlikely alliance you've ever heard of. They've teamed up with Muslim powers to stop Portugal from destroying their entire empire. One naval battle off the coast of Diu, India, will decide whether the floating city survives or becomes just another forgotten footnote in history. But hold up. How did a bunch of refugees hiding in swampy lagoons become so powerful that their downfall required battles fought half a world away? Today, we're diving into the absolutely insane story of Venice. A city that shouldn't exist, built by people who had no other choice, and powered by three resources so simple you'll kick yourself for not thinking of them first. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll never look at salt the same way again. The birth of impossibility. Let's start with the obvious question. What kind of absolute madmen decide to build a city on water? Well, here's your answer. Desperate ones. It's the 5th century, and the mighty Roman Empire is basically having the worst midlife crisis in history. Barbarian tribes are throwing the ancient world's biggest house party, except the party involves sacking cities, and the party favors are, well, death. Rome itself got ransacked by the Goths in 410 AD. But that was just the opening act. Enter stage left, Attila the Hun. Yeah, that Attila. The guy was basically the medieval equivalent of a natural disaster with anger management issues. In 452 AD, Attila decided Italy looked nice and conquerable. He steamrolled through Milan like it was made of cardboard. But his real masterpiece? The complete and utter destruction of Aquileia. Now, Aquileia wasn't some backwater village. This was one of Roman Italy's crown jewels, home to over 100,000 people. Today, it's got about 3,500 residents. That's not urban decline. That's apocalyptic level renovation. But here's where our story gets interesting. As Attila's forces turned Aquileia into ancient rubble, thousands of terrified refugees looked at their options. Stay and become Hun appetizers, or flee to that weird marshy lagoon everyone always avoided. Guess what they chose? On March 25th, 421 AD, some say it was exactly at noon because apparently even refugees had a sense of dramatic timing. The first settlers arrived at the Venetian lagoon. But here's the plot twist nobody saw coming. What started as a desperate escape plan was about to become one of history's greatest success stories. The question is, how do you turn a swamp into an empire? The Trinity of Unlikely Power. Okay, so you're a 5th century refugee who just fled to a lagoon that most people wouldn't use as a vacation spot. Your city planning options are limited. Your building materials are questionable. Your future looks about as stable as your foundation. Yet somehow, these early Venetians discovered 3 resources that would make them richer than kings. And I guarantee you won't see these coming. Resource number 1. Fish revolutionary, right? People living near water. Catch fish. But here's the thing. In a world where famine was always one bad harvest away, having a reliable protein source was like having a money printer. The Venetian lagoon was basically a medieval McDonald's that never ran out of inventory. Resource number 2. Timber weight. Timber? In a lagoon? Plot twist. Venice needed to build on water, and wood was their solution. These absolute madmen drove millions, and I mean millions, of wooden stakes into the lagoon floor. Each stake was placed next to the next, creating platforms that could support entire stone buildings. Here's the kicker. After 400 years of this construction, those wooden foundations are still there, still holding up buildings, still defying every law of physics you thought you knew about wood and water. But how is that possible? Turns out, when wood is submerged in silty, salty water without enough oxygen, it doesn't rot, it petrifies. It becomes harder than stone. Venice is literally built on wood that turned itself into rock through sheer stubbornness. But resource number 3? That's where things get really interesting. White gold and the birth of an empire. Salt. I can already hear you thinking, really? Salt? That's your big reveal? Listen, in a world without refrigerators, salt wasn't a seasoning. It was survival. It was the only way to preserve meat and fish. Armies marched on salt. Cities lived or died based on salt access. And Venice? Venice controlled the salt trade like they invented it. They didn't just stumble into this business, they weaponized it. State-run salt works, enforced monopolies. They literally went to war over salt. For centuries, Venice's salt trade filled their coffers and built their iconic palazzos. But here's the ironic twist that'll blow your mind. The very salt that made Venice rich is now threatening to destroy it. Rising sea levels are allowing salt to accumulate on building walls through evaporation and recrystallization, eating away at the city's structural integrity. Talk about a long-term plot twist. However, salt was just the beginning. Venice's real genius was in location, location, location. The Silk Road shortcut. While the rest of Europe was busy fighting over muddy castles, Venice was playing 4D chess with geography. See, they were perfectly positioned as the gateway between Europe and Constantinople, the door to all the riches of the East. Silk, spices, pepper, everything exotic and expensive had to flow through Venice. The Byzantines, grateful for Venetian help against some troublesome Norman adventurers, granted Venice unrestricted access to their markets. It was like getting a VIP backstage pass to medieval capitalism. Two major trade routes emerged. The northern route, Venice to Greece to Constantinople to the Black Sea. The southern route, Venice to Crete to Alexandria or Cyprus. By the 13th century, Venice wasn't just a city. It was the center of a sprawling trade empire that connected 3 continents. But success brings enemies, and Venice was about to face its greatest internal threat. The surveillance state masterpiece. Venice called itself a republic, but don't let that fool you. This wasn't democracy. This was oligarchy with better marketing. The city was run by wealthy families, with an elected doge at the top and a great council of 100 members pulling the legislative strings. Everything was going smoothly until 1310, when nobles Baiamonte and Marco Quirini decided they wanted a regime change. Their coup attempt failed spectacularly. Venice's response? They invented the medieval surveillance state. Enter the Council of 10, operating out of the beautiful but sinister Doge's Palace. These guys made their decisions in complete secrecy and created their own police force, the Capi dei Dieci. But here's where it gets really creepy. They turned citizens into informants using lions' mouths, special mailboxes carved like lions where people could drop anonymous tips about their neighbors. Medieval crowdsourcing of paranoia. Get accused of a crime? Your last view of freedom would be crossing the bridge of sighs into darkness. The Doge's prison was a nightmare. It flooded during high tide, because of course it did. It's Venice. But drowning was the least of your worries. They had devices like the strappado, designed to inflict maximum non-lethal pain. Capital punishment? That happened right outside between 2 columns on the piazza. Even today, Venetians consider it bad luck to walk between those columns. The Council of 10 was supposed to be temporary. Spoiler alert, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. They lasted until the Republic's end. But Venice's biggest challenge wasn't internal. It was about to come from a microscopic enemy. the Black Death and the beginning of the end. Being at the center of Mediterranean trade had its perks, but it also made Venice ground zero for the Black Death. An estimated 100,000 Venetians died from the plague, roughly a third of the population. The city became a floating morgue. But Venice recovered from the Black Death. What it couldn't recover from were the tectonic shifts in world politics that were about to make their trade empire obsolete. Remember when Venice helped weaken the Byzantine Empire? Yeah, that decision was about to bite them in the lagoon. In 1453, the Ottoman Turks conquered Constantinople. While Venice maintained decent trade relations with the Ottomans, the Turkish pressure on Europe prompted other powers to start looking for alternative routes to the east. And that's when everything started falling apart. The last desperate gambit. Spain and Portugal figured out they could sail around Africa or across the Atlantic to reach the riches of the east. The French, Dutch, and British followed suit. Venice, watching their monopoly crumble, made one of history's most unusual alliances. They teamed up with Muslim powers to try blocking Portugal's access to the Indian Ocean. This brings us back to that crucial battle at Diu in 1509, Venice's last-ditch effort to maintain relevance in global trade. They lost. Portugal won and secured the trade routes for itself and future European powers. Venice tried one more Hail Mary in 1586, building their own Suez Canal. It failed spectacularly. By the 17th century, Venice was a backwater. When Napoleon showed up in 1797, they couldn't even put up a fight. The independent Republic of Venice was over. The modern irony. Today, Venice welcomes 5.7 million tourists annually. The city that once controlled global trade now survives on people wanting to see where that control once existed. But Venice faces a new existential threat. The very water that protected it for over a millennium is now trying to reclaim it. The Great Flood of 1966 burst the canals and sent water through historic buildings. Another massive flood in 2019 submerged 85% of the city. Sea levels are rising. The European Geosciences Union predicts water could rise 3 feet by 2100. Italy's response? The MOSE system, mobile barriers designed to shield Venice from rising tides. First deployed in 2020, it kept the city dry during a 4-foot tide surge. But here's the final irony that brings this story full circle. The salt that made Venice rich is now eating away at its buildings through continuous evaporation and recrystallization. Experts suggest the lower walls need constant desalination treatment. The very foundation of Venice's success might ultimately cause its destruction. The legacy of impossible ambition. So there you have it. The complete insane journey of Venice from desperate refugee camp to global superpower, to tourist destination fighting for survival. What can we learn from this 1,000-year roller coaster? First, sometimes the worst locations become the best advantages. Venice's useless lagoon became their impregnable fortress. Second, never underestimate simple resources. Fish, timber, and salt built an empire. Third, every advantage eventually becomes a disadvantage if you don't adapt. Venice's perfect position for Mediterranean trade became a liability when trade moved to the Atlantic. And finally, the very things that make you successful might eventually destroy you. A lesson Venice is learning as salt slowly eats away at their foundations. But what do you think? Could Venice have adapted differently to survive the age of exploration? Should they build higher walls, or just accept that some cities have expiration dates? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and your insights might just inspire the next deep dive into history's most impossible stories. If this journey through Venice's rise and fall blew your mind, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about civilizations that shouldn't have existed but somehow changed the world anyway. Next week, we're exploring another impossible city. This time, one built in the desert that controlled the world's most valuable trade route. Trust me, you won't see that story coming either. Until then, keep questioning the impossible.